We would like to open this up for questions and answers from you. So it can be to everyone or an individual elected. So does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Oh, yes?
This is kind of just like an SLV-ish problem. I don't really know much about what's going on with like the water district and like everything that's going on with that, but like it's kind of just everything that's in the press banner. So I was wondering if you could kind of go like, what is it about? Like I don't want to look it up, but I just wanted you to tell me. Thank you.
And we could actually open this up to a greater issue about press and what you read in the press and what you believe, what you shouldn't believe.
Yeah, 25 words or less. Let's see. It's a very pressing issue in the San Lorenzo Valley Water District. First of all, there's two things really that are going on that are pressing. There was a small Lompico Water District with 500 customers that was separate from the San Lorenzo Valley Water District with about 8,000. We put together an effort to have them merge, which they needed to do. They had to. Lompico was it just wasn't operating at all. We lost, and this is, I want to tell you how one vote counts. We had an election to merge them, and it lost by one vote. One vote, if it would have been flipped. So we said, no, we're not going to give it up. We're going to go to a different procedure, and did it, and it won, well, very, very handily by more than 2/3 of the vote. It needed a majority. That now has become a contentious issue between the two districts. Lompico thinks it's not getting what it was going to get. The San Lorenzo Valley Water District thinks it's giving them everything they wanted, and it's about how the priority list is and where Lompico sits on their capital improvements program. That's an oversimplification, but that's basically it. But then there was an issue where one of the members, former San Lorenzo Valley Water District director, his wife was a realtor, and they sold some property that his wife it was part of the district, and his wife was part of that. The district defended him and spent hundreds of thousands of dollars doing it, and they lost, but now there's that contentious moment. He wants them to continue defending him and take it up higher to the court level, and people in the district are just saying they're sick and tired of it. Why are you spending all this money defending this guy? Let's just move on. So those are two issues that are very contentious up in the San Lorenzo Valley on water right now.
And the other thing I will just add is that there is an effort for the San Lorenzo Valley Water District and the Scotts Valley Water District to work together to ensure that the groundwater, that you have sustainable groundwater systems in place to make sure that there will always be water in the San Lorenzo Valley. And so that's so there is contention, but there's also collaboration to figure out what our long-term needs are.
Anyone else? Okay. Any other questions? If not, I have a few of my own. Yeah. So I would like to know, supervisors, you are a body of 5. Assemblymember, you are a body of, what is it, 80? So how do you decide on tough issues? How do you come to a consensus on making a decision?
So I think the important thing is that there's 5 of us, and actually in the state constitution there's 5 of us in every county except for San Francisco, which is a city-county combination. But I can't afford, we may disagree on issues, but we have a very good working relationship because each one of us is 20% of the vote that the other person's going to need to make a difference in their district as well, right? So I represent Aptos and La Selva Beach and some parts of Capitol and into Watsonville, but so I think that the consensus word that Maureen used is very important because I don't think you see that right now at the national level, right? I mean, I think people feel like it's very contentious and very nasty, but at the local level, when there's just 5 people, we have to work together to come to an agreement because we might not be on the same side on this issue, but we're going to need the other person to come together on another issue, which I think is a great advantage of a body of just 5 members.
Does anyone here play sports? Okay, so politics in many ways is like sports in that there's a big competition, right, of elections every 4 years or 2 years where you have to go out and campaign, and it's very much like I'm going to go out and solve this problem and that problem. But then you get elected, and it becomes very much a team sport where it takes 3 of 5 at least on the Board of Supervisors to make any decisions. And you have to understand what your colleagues want, what the community wants, what's going on in their districts, and it becomes a much more collaborative effort to try to find solutions to problems. And sort of based on what Zach says, like at the national level, I don't get you what you want. You guys want free college. I can be like, well, I would give you free college, but the Republicans will never give you free college. At the local level, I can't say, oh, I would pick up your trash, but Bruce McPherson is not letting me pick up your trash. Nobody would believe that, right? So you at the local level, you have to work together to get things done because you can't just blame some distant people somewhere else. People expect you to solve the problems. They're the problems that you face every day in your communities. And so it's a really different way to work that can be really positive.
I think one part of it is that the element of partisanship is taken out of the County Board of Supervisors. It's a nonpartisan office, and as a matter of fact, I'm no party preference or decline to state. I think that's what the office is, and that's what the people want. So you don't get into that partisan bickering. And as a matter of fact, we can't, by law, talk to more than one of the other of us about an issue per se, or you violate the Brown Act to, in essence, coerce to say, hey, this is the way I'm going to go and this is the way we're going to do it. So there's that element in all levels of government where you have to watch out, or you just follow the rules of not discussing a particular issue with more than one of your other colleagues. But you make it clear, too, and I think that when I was elected to the Assembly, and the caucus had me in their first meeting, I was known, I'll probably be called the lib by one of these guys here pretty soon, but I made it very clear to my colleagues about this is where I stand and why I do, and it was particularly noticeable in some social issues, environmental issues, and educational issues. I just made it clear, and if you get into office and you are talking with one of your colleagues, tell them what you're for. And I would like to see us all emphasize what we're for and not so much what we're against. You can be against something and then say, no, I don't like that because this is what I think should be done. But I think we just are in the negative trend right now, unfortunately, and particularly in the federal level for one reason or other, and I'm not going to go into that. But let's just give it a positive deliver your message in a positive manner as much as you can. Sir, you're going to be against something. I get it. But try to be positive in what you say and be clear of where you stand and why you're there.
The only thing I'll add is it's okay to disagree. I mean, we're 5 different people up here. We're all different people, and you have to do it respectfully. Because in a community, you want to try to reach that consensus, but we all may choose different ways in which to get there. So on the County Board of Supervisors, the 4 of us up here, we're all 4 different people. We may choose to do things 4 different ways, but we represent the districts that we come from, but we work for everybody in Santa Cruz. So at the end of the day, what happens on an item at the board, we have to think not only about in my first district hat, but also in my Santa Cruz County hat. And that's generally worked pretty well. And this board is remarkable in the way in which we respect each other's opinion, and we generally agree on most things. And when we disagree, it's never the same group of people who agree or disagree. There's interesting breaks there because we're 5 different people.
So from 5 to 80, or is it 79? I can't remember.
You should know. You guys have it so easy because they have to count to 3 and they can pass anything they want. I have to count to 41 in my House, 21 in the Senate, and then talk the governor into signing it. Otherwise, nothing happens. In the legislature, there are probably, because every policy goes through committees, and then to one house and then the other. So there are probably 10 points at which one needs a yes to advance policy. Any no, and that policy is dead for that session. It's much more complicated. And it's a little bit harder, and something that John said is really very important. Do we represent our districts? Same thing at the state level. Or do we represent issues across the entire state? And here you have 4 here in front of you, county supervisors that have a broader sense of their obligation to the county. The state level, not always so much. People sometimes can't get out of their district or just can't get out of the bubble that Sacramento is. Although the Brown Act was mentioned, and I want somebody to ask them a policy question and watch them squirm, because they really can't talk policy with any more than 2 in the room at the same time unless it's a publicly noticed meeting. And one of the things that Zach was just chiding me about, of course, the legislature makes rules for local government. We make rules for ourselves. Do we make more lenient rules for ourselves than we do for local government? What do you think? Yeah. It's self-serving, and it's a problem. And if you've been reading the newspapers about all of the sexual harassment, sexual assaults that are coming out now in Sacramento, and the secret settlements, I've been trying to run bills to prohibit secret settlements like that. No wonder I can't get it through the legislature. There's a lot of self-interest up there, which we have to really watch out for. It becomes a lot more apparent at this level. And then something that Bruce said, over the last 5 years that I've been in the legislature, and a lot of dynamics in some of the rules that we operate under, the term limits and things have really changed. And the Democrats, I'm a Democrat, are in a supermajority. And so the Republicans are a smaller and smaller group. But yet, probably in the last 40 years, we have not done more on a bipartisan basis than we're doing right now. Because there's a growing sense of what's right, that the more perspectives you have on the table as you're having a conversation about policy, the better that policy is going to be. And that's something that brings California a lot of strength. And it's not that we disagree. We're supposed to disagree. It's how we disagree. And if we disagree productively and in a way that adds to the conversation, or if we disagree by standing on a soapbox and taking shots, personal shots and sniping, 2 very, very different outcomes. And there's still legislators who do that, and they don't get much policy done. And even the Republicans who do that aren't favored by their own party. And so we're learning how to govern in the state of California and doing a much better job than what's going on the national level. And those of us who came from local government understand that a lot better than those who didn't. And the more you engage you are in your community and engaged in the decision-making process, the stronger those decisions are, because you're building a bigger base for whatever that decision is. And that's why decisions in Santa Cruz are going to be different than decisions in Orange County, as Secretary Laird points out, because there's different political will and different policies. And for this group here, Santa Cruz Board of Supervisors has a very different political will than other parts of the state. And they've done some things that are absolutely remarkable when it comes to criminal justice and juvenile justice, health, human services. And I keep hearing from my colleagues, oh, you can't do that. That'll never get done. And I have to say, come to Santa Cruz, because of the collaboration and their willingness to work with the community and step out and make tough decisions. That sets a different standard that then becomes a model for other parts of the state. And that's what can happen with a collaborative group.
Thank you. And, oh, very good.
So what exactly do the county supervisors do? Like, what do you affect? Well,
Well, the County Board of Supervisors is in some ways like a city council, right? So we're a land use authority. We take care of parks, police services, public works, your roads, just like they would in a city. We cover, for those services, it's all the areas in Santa Cruz County that are outside the 4 cities. In addition, counties also take care of the health and human services programs in the county. So whether that be child protective services or environmental health or our water resources, that is something that the county is responsible for, as well as the correction system. So the county jail we're responsible for. So it's like a super city council. We can do things that affect the cities around health and human services issues sometimes, but land use, public works, those are going to just be in the unincorporated area.
I think that pretty much says it all, but also that you're more of a do-it-all or address-it-all in the county board of supervisors level. In the legislature, as Mark was mentioning, the process of going through committees and all, you're usually assigned to 5 or 6 or 5 committees, and that's where you really focus your attention. You have more focus in some sense, even though there's 2,500 bills a year introduced in the legislature that go through that process, but you vote on things when they come to the floor, but you focus on those that the committees that you represent when you're in the legislature. In the county board of supervisors, it covers it all.
Yeah, I think it's all been covered. Is there another question over here? Is someone else? Yeah.
Okay, my question is, what is, like, individually, like, in your districts, and I guess countywide, what would you say is the most, I wouldn't say important issue, but, like, I guess most pressing issue you're dealing with, and what are you doing about it? Not, like, in a mean way, but what are you doing about it?
Your most pressing issue.
I think that one of the most pressing issues in the entire county is housing and affordable housing, and as a result of that, homelessness and issues around homelessness. You know, you have to earn $70,000 a year to afford a 2-bedroom apartment in Santa Cruz County. $70,000 a year. Think about that for a second. Which is about twice the national median income. And it's higher than the local median income, for that matter, by a significant amount. And so, you know, we as a board collectively have said that we're willing to change things in order to allow more housing to get built. It's a complex problem, right? And it's hard to build things in Santa Cruz County. People are resistant to change, understandably. It's a beautiful area and people don't want that to change. But look, I look at all of you, and I just told you $70,000 to afford a rental, right? I mean, how many of you think that you're going to go off to college and come back and be able to afford a house here? Honestly. Okay, that's about the right number, 0. So we have a responsibility, and the state, by the way, and we owe a lot to Mark on this, has done a lot in more in the last legislative session than probably in some respects in the history of the state legislature to do this. But we are doing a lot of things on housing, but I would argue that housing and homelessness, which are very closely tied, I mean, there are a lot of pressing issues, but for me, I think housing and homelessness are really right up toward the top of the list.
Stand up. No. Okay. So for the homelessness issue, I know that, like, tampons and pads are a luxury item. And I have, like, spoken to homeless women in Santa Cruz who have literally not eaten on the week that they had their periods because they had to spend what little money they had on those things instead of food. And I just want to know what you're doing about that, if you can do anything about that.
Let me start from the state perspective a little bit on that to show you differences in perspectives, because I know this group is more sensitive to the needs of the homeless. But there was a bill this last year that would have said that feminine products would not carry a sales tax, for example, which seems like an easy thing to do, kind of a no-brainer. In the Women's Caucus in the legislature, this was one of their high priorities, and that got vetoed. So there's a real lack of understanding of what people need and how we connect the dots on some of the basic needs. And at the local level, we can drive, and I'm hoping that more will be done at the local level, because that sets us the stage for the state level, because we're not able to quite always do the same things we can at the local level. But I think we need to rethink what basic needs are. Yes, it's housing, but we need to expand sort of what that perspective is to provide people what they need when they need it, and truly need it, in order for them to have at least some basic quality of life, and then connect them with the services that ultimately they need to help them in their circumstances. Most of the homeless issues are at the local level. The state's been trying to put money on the table, because a few years ago the state took money away, to put money on the table to let local jurisdictions make the right decisions for their communities.
Yeah, I think just to sort of talk to your question about sort of what do we do, on the homeless issue, this is something we're all really focused on. And one of the things to recognize, I think, when we talk about homeless, we're all thinking about that guy who sits on the mall, or that's the homeless person. But in fact, there's probably 12 different categories of homeless people who all have totally different needs, right? There's farm workers in South County, there's families and young children who are homeless, there's young adults who are homeless, there are people with mental illness, there are people with substance abuse, there are people just traveling through. It's a wide variety, and each one of those populations requires a different solution and different set of treatment. And so what we've been trying to do is identify those different populations and then come up with funding to get people first housed, because we can provide them, we do provide them with meals, and we provide them with medical care and those sorts of things. But until somebody's housed, trying to then stabilize their lives is really hard, right? Like, so getting somebody drug treatment and then having them graduate and be homeless the next day, it's not going to be surprising that they're going to have to struggle with drug treatment in a couple weeks, because they're dealing with the elements. And so what we're trying to do is align services, get people the right services at the right time, and then align all the services in order to get them the best opportunity. But it's extremely difficult when people who are working and making really good livings can't afford to live here. The idea that we're going to be able to find places for 3,000 homeless people in Santa Cruz County is really is a big, big challenge.
Yeah, and I would say and I know, John, a big unit of the homeless came from around the city of Santa Cruz and downtown, and now they're on the riverfront, the bench lands that we have, and they'll be there until the rains come, and then it's 3 feet under, and then I don't know where they're going to go. But this is a problem that is everywhere. Everywhere you go, you've heard about it. And we are trying to really get to it. I think that one of the best ways that we can help the homeless is to address their medical needs. When people have gone down there to try to treat them and and prevent the problems like the hepatitis A that much of you have heard about or read about, I'm sure, we need to address those. And it's primarily, I don't, not to categorize them, but it's primarily a drug problem that a lot of these folks have. And we need to see what we can do to get them off that, and then they can get on the track to owning a house and be productive parts of our society.
I would say for the women here today, it is, I'm sure it's slightly dispiriting to see 5 guys up here. And so a question about feminine products to 5 guys, I think my colleagues have done a good job to sort of tell what we are doing at a state and local level. I just want to also share that we're very sensitive, especially to the issue of women. Just this year, the sheriff commissioned a report on the issues of women in incarceration. It was called Gender Matters. And our board did a 2-hour study session to try to take a look at what those issues were, because the issues of women in our county jail are different than the issue of men in our county jail. And we've just created a justice and gender task force to sort of take a look at whether we need to have some gender-specific policies so we can stop sort of a revolving door of women in our county jail. Women are, since the change of a prison realignment back in 2010, we've seen an increase in the number of women in our jail. The issues that they face are different. The statistics are startling about the challenges they face. And we need to create policy at a local level to ensure that we're actually not contributing to the trauma of the criminal justice system, and work to strengthen families so we can keep people out of, keep women out of the criminal justice system and keep families together. And so I just share that because I wanted you to know that as a board, the Board of Supervisors is 5 guys. And I think we see it as a responsibility that we look at issues that affect more than just the 5 men up there, but the women in our community, people of color, and children. So I just wanted to share that with you because I think it's emblematic of how we have to look at lots of different issues.
We have a question here.
Do you guys care if I ask about state legislature? No? Yeah? Is that okay? What do you guys think about, or did you guys have a hand on SB 239, the bill on? The one where it lowers knowingly transmitting AIDS or HIV from a felony to a misdemeanor?
Yeah. There are a number of laws in the state of California that have been built on emotion, and that was one of them. There are transmitting STDs, knowingly transmitting any kind of a disease or something that's harmful is already against the law. But there was this big stigma, and too bad John Lair's not here, that has been built up around AIDS and HIV over the years. And the level of that crime is the highest of anything and completely unjustifiable. And so this was the first time that what we did was reset the transmission of AIDS and HIV to the same level as any other disease or any other harmful effect that gets passed from one to the other, trying to take the emotion out of what had created that situation. We also did the same thing this year around sex crimes, because right now there's a whole spectrum of sex crimes, but it's hard for us to talk about that, and it's hard for us to distinguish those. And politically, oh my gosh, sex crime, end of story, send them away forever and ever and ever. And we register everybody, and we have created a system of bias and a system of stigma that makes absolutely no sense. And so for the first time this year as well, and this is the same kind of a category of things, is we're trying to rationalize, take the emotion out, and put a reasonable system of accountability in place based on the severity of it and the AIDS, HIV. And that was run by Senator Scott Wiener, who's a gay man out of San Francisco, and is something that was very, very important to him. We do have a growing gay and lesbian number of legislators, and that's really changed our ability to have conversations about queer issues in the legislature. We have a declining number of women, however. So for all the girls in here, I want you to think of politics as a real opportunity to have a voice, because again, just like with having gay legislators, lesbian legislators, that allows us to do more than we would otherwise. When we lack any particular voice in the legislature among 80, 40 in the Senate, that's 120 legislators. When we lack a particular voice, we lack a healthy perspective. And so that's what just happened this last year. The governor signed that. So we changed the penalties around transmitting AIDS and HIV. So the question is should driving without a suspended license be depends on the circumstance, but yeah, potentially. And again, we didn't take away penalties for it. We made penalties for transmitting HIV similar to other STDs, and so it's a similar amount of relative harm and a similar amount of punishment. There are always going to be within, this is one of the things we're trying to do, there are not rational bases for different levels of punishment. So if you grab a punishment out of this part of the code and a punishment out of that part of the code, I promise you're going to find inequities. And that is something that we are trying to address. There are people who go away for life terms, for smaller levels of crime, and those because they're negotiated sentences who have committed a similar or more of a crime and actually have less of a punishment. There's some real inconsistencies in punishments and in how we address that, and that is something that is ongoing. It's one of the reasons we're looking at bail reform right now.
Supervisor Leopold?
Well, I just wanted to add that one of the things that I think that we've had a better understanding is there's so much in criminal justice, which is really a public health issue. My colleagues refer to issues around homelessness and other issues that we want to deal with, the core public health issues. But when we look at this at the penalties around HIV, they were created in a time where people were really scared. I ran a campaign in 1988 against two AIDS measures that were on the statewide ballot. I was the county coordinator here, and they were cynical attempts by politicians to use people's fear of the AIDS epidemic. This is the late 80s, where we didn't know a lot, to advance their political careers and make terrible laws. We were successful in defeating the mandatory reporting of partners when someone was diagnosed with HIV, because that is bad public health policy. You need to gain trust, you need to be able to talk with people, and you need to be able to promote safe sex practices within the entire community instead of penalizing and driving people away from getting tested. This was a big issue in the 80s and 90s, and I'm really glad to see that the legislature is taking some action to turn back the clock on some of these pieces, because they were terrible attempts to create policy based on fear rather than science. And we need more of that in the state legislature and Congress.
I have a question. What impact do you, I'm sorry, is there somebody who had a question? Because we're here for you first.
If we do want to go into government and politics later in life, either after high school or after college, are there any tips for becoming involved in creating a name for ourselves into the political world?
That was my question. Amazing.
Well, if you follow a route similar to I do, being involved with your community and working on local issues, you'll be able to best understand what's going on in your community, and that will provide lots of leadership opportunities. And you'll build relationships that can help propel you to office. And so just working together is the best thing that you can do, and identifying issues that you care about, and you can find others that care about, and try to make that change, whether it be a school policy, a city or county policy, or state or federal policy. It's that you'll learn all the analytical skills that you need. You'll develop the relationships that will become important, and you'll be able to identify the opportunities that, if you choose to be an elected official, that'll present itself.
I think to get involved in something, as I said earlier, that identify yourself with the cause. I mean, and be sincere about it, obviously, or you wouldn't spend the time and effort to do it. But you need to get involved, and I think if you do get into a campaign, my advice is don't have a list of 20 things that you want to explain, because people start rolling their eyes after number 5 or 6. Just get a focus on what you really want to do, and then you can expand that too. There are plenty of opportunities for public service here, and realistically, not very many are going to be elected to public office. I mean, there's almost 40 million, 39 million people in the state of California now. We've had probably just in the low thousands or hundreds of people who have served in the state senate or state assembly. So if you don't get there, don't feel like you've failed. I just would pursue your effort of public service, of what interests you, and identify yourself with what you're interested in, so if you do run for office, people will know about it.
The best part about politics is it's so easy to get involved, because so few people do, that you, just by showing up and getting involved in an issue or finding a candidate that you support, go out and, you walk some neighborhoods for them or seal some envelopes. And I guarantee you all of us remember everyone who's ever showed up to seal an envelope for us. And if those people show up and say, now I want to get involved or I want to be on a commission so I can start to think about running, we're always happy to help. And so that, it's probably what he'll talk about, but so at the local level you can do that, and even at the national level where Zach has showed up on presidential campaigns, started as a volunteer and ends up being a communications director for Barack Obama in a state, right? And so as long as you show up and you work hard, you can really get active and make a big difference.
Be willing to say yes when other people say no. Be willing to step up when no one else is willing to step up. And I guarantee you'll be noted by your community for those things. As Ryan mentioned, one of the things that I believe that we lament most in our elected world is how few people participate in the process. And we are constantly trying to ensure that the policies we make are actually representative of the community's desires and best interests. And the easiest way to know that is when there's the greatest level of participation. But right now at the local, state, and national level, that isn't necessarily the case. And as Ryan mentioned too, I have found in my own personal life, having started, as he had mentioned, on a campaign in 2004 for then, it eventually became John Kerry's campaign, the presidential campaign. I started at an exceptionally low level, and in the case of just a few months, by working hard, ended up in a deputy national director level at the Democratic National Committee, and because people notice, because you're willing to say yes, and you put in the hours, and you volunteer, and you commit, and as a result of that, I've worked on a number of national presidential campaigns, but that's how you can do it. There's no magic formula other than being willing to do it. It turns out most people just don't want to do it. They just actually don't want to put in the work. They don't want to say yes, and they don't want to stand up for things that even though they are right, sometimes they're hard, right? Your peer networks aren't engaged or interested in the issue. You've got to be willing to do that, and if you do, you'll guarantee. The fact that you even asked the question, though, shows me already that you're there. So let us know how we can help that way.
So the one thing that the five of us have in common, and the only thing that ultimately matters, is that we each got at least one vote more than 50% of those who voted in that election. So it's that simple. It's really that simple. It's not. It's a matter of how do you get out there, how do you make your case to the voters? And you make that case to the voters. And some of my colleagues are not that much older than you are. They're in their early 30s. I have one colleague who was first elected to the Assembly at the age of 27. He was able to make the case to the voters. But you do that by building your connections within the community and getting people to know you and trust the work that has been done, what you say, what you stand for, and that show that you're willing to do the work. And that's the path.